All right, Who Dat Nation, let's talk Davante Adams. We got all of that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're talking Davante Adams and why the New Orleans Saints absolutely should be interested in at least checking in on the possibility of making this trade. We'll take a look at the in-season trends for the New Orleans Saints because they changed drastically when it came to in-season trades very recently. We'll dive into the price it will take in order to get Davante Adams to New Orleans and why it's absolutely worth it. And then we're going to kick everything off here with a simple fact. Yes, the New Orleans Saints should absolutely be interested in trading for Davante Adams. And yes, it does make them a lot better if they did it. We got all that and much more coming up for you. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In today's episode, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is excellent. You can go and check them out today because right now, if you're a first-time customer, you put down a $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Yes, and yes. The New Orleans Saints should absolutely be interested in trading for Las Vegas wide receiver Davante Adams. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Will they? Can they get it done? Can they afford it? We're going to break all that down today. But here's what I will say. Just from a bare bones specific type of situation or just from a bare bones look at this specific situation, yes, the New Orleans Saints should absolutely be interested in getting this done. Why? Well, Dennis Allen, just a couple days ago on Monday, said that the New Orleans Saints needed to find somebody that could make plays outside of Chris Olave, outside of Alvin Kamara, outside of Taysom Hill, and outside of Rashid Shaheed on the offensive side of the football. Well, the typical New Orleans Saints approach to that would be to find somebody within the building that will be able to contribute. But it's been a little bit of a while, hasn't it, since the New Orleans Saints have said that we hope to find the solution within the building and then actually have the solution within the building. Now, one place where I think the New Orleans Saints can get better production is from their tight end group. Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, these guys have been blocking between 56 to 76% of the time. So utilizing them more as playmaking options should be something that gives the New Orleans Saints that fourth, fifth option that they might be looking for over in their offense in order to be able to continuously spread the ball around. But with all of the injuries on their offensive line, they also have to rely on those guys to help as blockers. So getting somebody like Davante Adams, who would finally give you a third wide receiver, which the Saints don't presently have. Cedric Wilson Jr. has done a great job as a supporting piece to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, particularly his ability to be able to block in the slot. All of those things that we highlighted at the beginning of the season, but has not been somebody that's been able to really get involved as a pass-catching option. A.T. Perry has been both injured and inactive as they try to figure out what his role is in this new offense. Bub Means and Mason Tipton, the two rookies, are rookies. Not a lot is going to be asked of them as of right now. So New Orleans has to have that other option. Well, here's a really, really good one. And a really, really good one in a situation where he is truly set to hit the market or is truly set to be on the market. This isn't Deebo Samuel asking for a trade, Brandon Ayuk asking for a trade. These guys that ask for trades in order to get better positioning, contracts, all these other things. It's not those situations. This is literally Davante Adams head coach Antonio Pierce went on social media and liked a post about Davante Adams getting traded away from the Las Vegas Raiders. And as of Davante Adams' appearance on Up and Adams, the wonderful Kay Adams and her show over at FanDuel TV, they hadn't spoken, the coach and the player. That's a pretty divisive situation for a head coach that's supposed to be a culture builder. NAP, Antonio Pierce. So this is the situation that you're dealing with. This is a real situation where a really, really good player is going to likely be shipped off. And the New Orleans Saints should be interested. Not only should they be interested, but it sounds like Davante Adams is interested as well. And listen, here we go again, all right? the New Orleans Saints and another team end up being the two finalists in something, and some third team sweeps in and makes the trade. Stuff like this happens. All right. It's fine. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But the New Orleans Saints, at the very least, should be interested, because it sounds like Davante Adams is interested in the Saints. And this is a big key here, because based on what's been going on in Las Vegas for the past couple of years since Davante Adams has been there, or at least since his quarterback and Derek Carr, who he went to the Raiders to play alongside, departed from Las Vegas, things haven't been great. Feels like Las Vegas kind of owes him a little bit of a kindness, especially when your head coach is liking photos about you getting, or social media posts about you getting traded. The least they could do is trade him somewhere he wants to go, if they can get the reasonable compensation that they're looking for. So for New Orleans, for Davante Adams, it sounds like Davante Adams is absolutely interested in being traded to the New Orleans Saints. According to Adam Schefter over at ESPN, Davante Adams' two kind of highest ranked places that he would like to go are the New York Jets and the New Orleans Saints. Why? With the New York Jets, he would be reunited with quarterback Aaron Rodgers, who of course he played with over with the Green Bay Packers throughout the majority of his career. And then of course, the New Orleans Saints have Derek Carr under center, his former collegiate quarterback at Fresno State, and was the reason that he wanted to be traded from Green Bay to Las Vegas when Aaron Rodgers left. And so he got his opportunity to get 1 year with Derek Carr. And it was a good year, over 1,500 receiving yards, 100 receptions, led the NFL with 14 receiving touchdowns. They put in work. They did well. And that included 2 games of no Derek Carr, right? Because the Raiders made some choices by the end of the season. So for New Orleans, they have the draw. They will have the capital, which we'll dive into here in a second. But on top of that, they also have maybe a little bit of a hidden kind of X factor in this situation. Davante Adams and New Orleans Saints wide receiver coach Keith Williams, very close. They've worked together for a long time, not just when they were at Fresno State, but he has continued to work with Davante Adams. Keith Williams has throughout Davante Adams' career. In fact, the story that I wrote about Keith Williams introducing rugby balls to practice to kind of help with hand spread and all these other things during training camps and practices and everything, the story about where that came from was that Keith Williams was working with Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Keith Williams' daughter, who played soccer. And it was his daughter that threw him a soccer ball. Keith Williams caught the soccer ball and then put it down and then caught a football and then went, oh, there's something to this about having to catch something larger and then going to a football and making footballs feel smaller mentally and all these other things, and just by hand spread and all this stuff. But that story that I wrote about Keith Williams introducing rugby balls to Saints practice, the impetus for that came while they were working off to the side on a training session with Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, and then the Williams family. So that shows you right there a little bit of what that connection is like. So should the Saints be interested? Yes. Is Davante Adams interested? It sounds like. Now, can the New Orleans Saints get it done becomes the next question. So I wrote a piece over at LouisianaSports.net, and I tried to anticipate every question that I could when it comes to what that trade or what this trade could look like, the roadblocks, all those other things. So let's start to look at those questions and those roadblocks and how the New Orleans Saints can clear them, starting off with compensation, both from the trade perspective and the salary cap perspective. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Over 10 million users already taking advantage of the billions, billions of billions of dollars of awards that are being kind of doled out by PrizePicks as well for their winners. So go and check them out. They also offer weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts. They give you discounts on select player projections up to 25% to provide you even more value in your lineups. And all you have to do is work against their projections. Pick 2 to 6 players and then choose more or less than the projections. If you can get up to 4 wins on that, you can win up to 100 times your initial entry over at PrizePicks. So for instance, Justin Jefferson, 83.5 receiving yards. You like more or less? One I'm taking for sure this week is Tyreek Hill going up against the New England Patriots defense, 97.5 receiving yards. Give me the more on that one. So go and check them out today. Download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Again, that is $50 instantly when you play $5 by downloading the Prize Picks app and using code LOCKEDONNFL. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, family, I want to answer your biggest questions around a potential Davante Adams trade. I want to tell you why it can work, how the New Orleans Saints can get it done, what it means for the offense. So we're going to break it all down here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for being here. So let me tell you first the questions that I'm going to answer. All right, I want to be very clear. I want to do this right. Let me tell you the questions that I'm going to answer. What will it take in a trade in terms of trade compensation? How much money do you need from a salary cap perspective? How do you make the contract work? We'll also take a look at what this means for Chris Olave. Is this a one-year rental when it comes to Adams? And will this make the team better? Which is where I want to start. Will this make the New Orleans Saints better if they pulled off this trade for Davante Adams, considering what you would also have to give up to give him? My answer is unequivocally yes. Davante Adams is one of those guys. And that's something that the New Orleans Saints can use right now. I thought that Chris Olave gave his best wide receiver one performance last week that we had seen so far this season in terms of just being a reliable go-to option for Derek Carr. But I don't think that that changes by adding Davante Adams. There is so much production left to be had for this New Orleans Saints team. If you need an example as to how, look at the first 2 weeks and compare it to the most recent 2 weeks. There's absolutely production to be had, and Davante Adams would be a perfect fit for what it is that New Orleans is lacking, which is that big-bodied, physical wide receiver that you can move around and that can go and get you the tough yards. That's not just Chris Olave, because Chris Olave's done that, but he's having to do a lot of everything. So you could alleviate some of that when it comes to Davante Adams. We'll talk more Chris Olave here in a second. How much would it take to trade for Davante Adams? Well, according to the reports that are out there right now, and what I've heard myself, is that it's probably around a second-round pick plus additional compensation. So the typical disgruntled wide receiver trade over the course of the past few years, you think of Stephon Diggs going from Buffalo to Houston, for instance, this offseason. That was a second and a fifth-round pick in the same year plus a sixth-round pick in the next. If you were able to use that same trade or a second and a fifth-round pick from this year and nothing in the next year, whatever it might be, to get Davante Adams and something else back, whether it be a late round pick in a future year or something like that, stamp it, sign it, seal it, deliver it, send it. I don't think that this is a trade that requires you to send a first round pick. You could do something like what former New Orleans Saints general manager and current senior personnel advisor Randy Mueller said before the season began, of sending like a second round pick that has conditions and thresholds that have to be met in order for it to convey and convert to a first round pick. But now that you're doing this trade in season, I don't think that you have to do that because he's already played 4 games. Those thresholds are going to be harder to figure out, calculate, and all those other things. Keep it simple. A second, a fifth round pick, and maybe something from next year to get Davante Adams and something else in terms of like a late round pick or something, even if it's a future late round pick, would make sense. So not outside of what the New Orleans Saints have the capability of doing going into this next year's draft. And if we're being honest, their draft classes over the past couple of years, if you look at what they've been able to obtain on a more consistent basis, they've hit on some players, Brian Brzee and others. But if you look at where things have been, moving some of those late round picks in particular to get somebody like a Davante Adams is absolutely worth it. Now, what about the money that they need when it comes to the salary cap? So there's some work that has to be done in order to understand exactly how much Davante Adams will cost you when it comes to a potential trade and all these other things. And it's not as simple as the salary cap that he started the season with. So when he started the season this year, he was owed $16.89 million when it comes to his base salary. But that salary gets paid out in game checks. So basically, you're getting a prorated version of that contract because he's already played 4 weeks of the season. So at the moment, he sits around $13.5 million that's still owed to him right now. If you waited until the trade deadline to trade for him, or if the Raiders waited until the trade deadline to trade him, which would be after week 9, it's now the Tuesday following week 9. It got pushed back this season, then that would mean that the acquiring team would take on about $8.6 million. So what would have to happen? Because the Saints only have $2.26 million of salary cap to their, $3.26 million in terms of their salary cap, according to the NFLPA's public salary cap report. The Saints would have to restructure and rework his deal once it shows up. But that could be advantageous for New Orleans and the trading team anyway, or the acquiring team anyway, because he carries massive base salaries in 2025 and 2026. $35.6 million in 2025, $36.6 million in 2026. But here's the catch to that. None of that base salary is guaranteed. $0 of it is guaranteed. So not only could you rework this deal in terms of doing a restructure, like a typical restructure with void years, which would probably knock $13 million, $13.5 million down to about $4 million, 4.4-ish, somewhere around there. But you could also eliminate all that guaranteed money in 2025 and 2026, and maybe even add guarantees in terms of what would turn into more like a rework and extension to keep him in New Orleans for more than just a year. You know, you've got Derek Carr for at least another year. So if you're trading for Davante Adams, it would make sense to keep those two guys together for more than just one part of the season. So that goes to answer the question, is this just a one-year rental for New Orleans? It does not have to be. Now, the New Orleans Saints are in dire straits when it comes to their salary cap situation in 2025. We all know that. They will deal with it. They'll figure it out. I'm sure that they already have a plan for it. And you don't make this trade unless you have a plan for how you want to deal with it. But New Orleans could make this work, and it could actually end up benefiting them here in 2024, here in 2024, and maybe in 2025, because here's the other thing. I mentioned that the New Orleans Saints only have about $3.26 million in salary cap. You know how you make more salary cap space? You extend Alvin Kamara. You extend Alvin Kamara, you drop a bit of what his base salary is here in 2024 in order to give him some guaranteed money in 2025 and or 2026, and drop and create some cap space for yourself here in this season so that you could potentially get Davante Adams and a reworked contract in under the salary cap ceiling. So that's how the New Orleans Saints could get that done. So we've answered so far what it would take in a trade, how much it would cost, how to make that money work, which we talked about with the restructure and also extending Alvin Kamara, how it doesn't have to be a one-year rental, and will it make the team better? I think the answer is yes to that question still. Now, what does this mean for Chris Olave? Because this is a challenging thing that you kind of have to work out. Chris Olave talked a lot last year about sort of like, or over the offseason in terms of an attitude shift and being a little bit more sort of like team oriented and all these other things. Like he spoke very candidly about those things. And so does adding a Davante Adams make things even more challenging for Chris Olave because it might limit some of the targets that he gets? I think if you add Davante Adams, your team gets better and then your team wins games. And as long as your team's winning games, everybody happy. Like everybody's happy. And so I think that becomes the big thing. Does it stifle a little bit of Chris Olave's growth? I don't think so, because you get the opportunity now to have him working with one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. It's not the same situation as like a Brandon Ayuk, who's like just as like getting their feet under them as anybody else because of injuries and all those other things. Davante Adams has been doing this for a long time. He's 32 years old. He's very experienced. He's an 8-time Pro Bowler. He's a 3-time All-Pro. Yeah, get him in the building and have him work with Chris Olave, have him work with Rashid Shaheed. I think this actually makes those guys better, even if it means that you're adding targets to another player. But we also look at Derek Carr. Derek Carr has not thrown for over 30 targets so far this season. And so there's targets to go around. There's production left to be had. All those other things are absolutely there. So I don't think that this stifles Chris Olave's opportunities going into this 2024 season, nor do I think that it makes things worse for him. In fact, I think that it draws attention away from him so that he doesn't necessarily have to be the decoy guy, and so that it ends up putting them in a situation where they're able to utilize all of these weapons and have sort of these go-to options. I apologize. I said that Derek Carr hasn't thrown for more than 30 passes in a game so far this season. I was wrong. The Atlanta Falcons game this past week was the first time that he has thrown over 30 passes, when he threw 36 in that. But against the Eagles, against the Cowboys, and against the Carolina Panthers, all sub 30 passing attempts. So there are absolutely more passing attempts to go around for this offense. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints, this type of move typically isn't in their DNA, but something changed in 2017, and I want to tell you all about it. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, where you can bring in a big return here early on in the NFL season, thanks to America's #1 sportsbook. The New Orleans Saints right now still underdogs, 5.5 points. I think they're going to be underdogs no matter what. Going into this game in Kansas City against the Chiefs, but waiting to see if that line moves a little bit, but still sitting comfortably at 5.5 at the moment. If you like the Saints to potentially cover, FanDuel is absolutely a place to get in on all that. You got the MLB playoffs as well. Let me pick a game here. We got the Detroit Tigers going up against the Houston Astros after the Tigers, who have been the Cinderella story so far this season, ended up winning game 1. Game 2, they're 1.5 point underdogs at the Astros. So definitely something to keep an eye out on there as well, and something to get in on over at FanDuel. Right now is a great time to do it because not only can you place your bets, but you can also check out the latest stats and play-by-play live as well on the same page where you place your bets. And right now, new customers will get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints, this type of move to trade for a big name in season really hasn't been a part of their DNA for a little bit, but there is a bit of a change in that tide over the course of the last bit here. And that is good news if you want the New Orleans Saints to trade for Davante Adams, that is. One other thing that I should mention, and Seth Walder over at ESPN laid this out as well, is that another way for a team like the Saints or another team to get a more affordable trade deal done with the Raiders is actually to have the Raiders take on some of Davante Adams' salary in order to move him. They've still got $28 million of salary cap space left at the moment. So if the Saints were willing to put up a little bit more, so instead of a 2nd round pick and a 5th round pick, something more like a 2nd and a 4th, I know they've already traded one of their picks, but if they did something like that, then it could potentially entice the Las Vegas Raiders to take on a little bit more of that salary before they end up kind of pushing things out and all that. So there is a way, or before they end up shipping Davante Adams out. So there are ways for them to also be able to work this as a part of the trade and then just send a little bit more in terms of trade compensation to get that done. They could certainly send a player as well, but I think you want to probably try to keep this to your looking at draft picks and everything like that. So just another note in terms of how the Saints could potentially get this done is to pay a little bit more in draft capital in order to convince the Las Vegas Raiders to take on some of Davante Adams' contract. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about something when it comes to the Saints sort of trade history in season. For a long time, going all the way back to 2006, the Saints didn't really make trades mid-season. But around 2017 or in 2017 or whatever, in actuality, that actually ended up changing quite a bit. So let me run down a little bit of the history of the New Orleans Saints with their in-season trades. From about 2006 to 2016, they ain't do squat. When it came to once the season started, they're not dealing, they're not doing anything like that. They made a lot of deals before the season, during the draft, and kind of at roster cuts. Like those are typically the hot spots for New Orleans Saints trades whenever they were to happen in terms of the NFL calendar. But once the season began, they typically backed away from any of that conversation. They weren't big dealers in at the trade deadline and things like that. But that shifted in 2017. It actually happened because of somebody that we've already mentioned in the show, Alvin Kamara. Back in 2017, the New Orleans Saints traded running back, you ready for this throwback? Adrian Peterson, New Orleans Saints great, to the Arizona Cardinals for a 2018 6th round pick. Ever since then, the Saints have either been in conversation at the trade deadline or in season for a player, or have actually made a move for a player. 2018, they traded a 4th round selection for, I'm sorry to evoke this name to you, Eli Apple, former New York Giants cornerback. 2020, they traded Kiko Alonso, who they had traded for before the season in 2019, but they traded Kiko Alonso in a 5th round pick to the San Francisco 49ers to land linebacker Quan Alexander. That was maybe the biggest trade deadline move that the Saints have made maybe since Mike McKenzie, like back in the day. Then you go to 2021, where they explored the opportunity to trade for Odell Beckham Jr. That was one of our examples of the Saints being kind of in the conversation as a finalist along with another team, and then another team just swooped in and ended up being able to make the trade to get him there, all those other things. So the Saints were a part of that conversation. In 2020, that was in 2021. In 2022, they traded a 2024 seventh round pick. So they literally traded the last pick that they possibly could to the Houston Texans in order to reunite with running back Mark Ingram. Super cool story when that happened. So that was awesome. So that was one back in 2022. And then last year, the Saints pursued a trade with none other than the Las Vegas Raiders, because there are some relationships there, obviously, with the Las Vegas Raiders to try to get Hunter Renfrow to New Orleans. But according to Ian Rappaport over at NFL Network, the financials were not able to be worked out. And so they ended up not making the trade. Interestingly enough, Hunter Renfrow is still sitting on the market, and the New Orleans Saints nor anybody else has signed him, despite the fact that the Saints actually were trying to trade for him last year to reunite him with quarterback Derek Carr. So now you have another opportunity to pull off a trade with the Las Vegas Raiders to reunite a wide receiver with quarterback Derek Carr. Can the New Orleans Saints get it done? So let's get to the bottom line here. That introduces you a little bit to, we can't make the argument anymore, I think is what I'm trying to say here, that the Saints don't make moves at the trade deadline, because every year, basically since 2017, they've been either in conversation or have executed trades in season nearing or at the trade deadline. So we don't get to say that it's not in their DNA anymore. We do get to say that it's not in their DNA to trade for a big name. That's one thing that we do get to say, is that this is typically not something the New Orleans Saints would do. But really think about it. The Saints are in a little bit of a desperation mode at the moment. 3 seasons without making playoffs. You've got a head coach that may or may not be on the hot seat. I never know when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. But if things are to continue to go as they've been going over the course of the past 2 weeks, especially with the defense being a part of what has led to their most recent losses, late in games, not being able to maintain late leads, things like that. I mean, we just saw the defense not allow a touchdown, and we just saw the defense before that only allow 15 points. That wasn't enough. There's more conversation to be had than just it's the defense's fault. But you look at the late game issues that they've had in terms of those clutch moments, and I think that that's the thing that you're looking for and that you're looking at. So this is a team right now that could be in turmoil by season's end if things continue to go down the road that they're going, and that could lead to some complications for Dennis Allen in terms of continuing to move forward. You want to curb that if you're Dennis Allen. Here's a guy that can help you get that done. So to me, that's the bottom line. You're in a bit of a desperation mode. You want to stop the nosedive that has happened over the course of the past 2 weeks. Is it fair to call a 2-week losing streak a nosedive? Probably not, but it's about to possibly be a 3-week losing streak. So maybe you call that one a nosedive, whatever it is that appeals to you in that situation. But you're trying to save some things here. You're trying to save your jobs. You're trying to save your season. You're trying to save sort of the kumbaya of the culture right now before it gets upended by the losses that have been taking place, tough losses that have been taking place. And the Saints right now have all of that together. They've got it all together. What they need to know is Davante Adams a good fit for their culture? Is Davante Adams a good fit for their locker room? I think there's enough overlap between Davante Adams and players on this roster and experience with this roster that will tell you that he is a good culture fit for the team. Will he give the effort? All those other things, that's another question. But if you trade for him and you land him and you put him in a situation where he feels like he can win games, which is not the situation that he's in over right now with the Las Vegas Raiders, I think that changes things for you. So the bottom line is absolutely yes, the New Orleans Saints should be interested in making this move. It doesn't mean that they will. It doesn't mean that they'll be able to pull it off. It doesn't mean that the Jets have more to offer. It doesn't, or that the Jets won't have more to offer. It doesn't mean that some other team won't swoop in that has more to offer. But it does mean that the New Orleans Saints should be interested and should be making this phone call to try to get Davante Adams to New Orleans, because I do believe it would make them a better football team moving forward. And I would go so far as to say that I would reopen my conversation of this team as a playoff team the way that we talked about them after the first 2 weeks of the season, simply by landing Davante Adams, especially if it came with the accompaniment of extending Alvin Kamara. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, you want to check out all the other teams that might be interested in Davante Adams, Locked On NFL has you covered. Tyler Rowland did a great job breaking that down. Tony Wiggins giving you all the biggest storylines from around the league as well. You can go and check out Locked On Pelicans with Jake Madison. Incredible interviews with David Griffin and Trey Murphy and everything else over at Locked On Pelicans. So please go and check that out as well. We appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.